Morning, Bill.
Morning.
Hey, happy Monday, right?
Yeah, come on.
Oh no, what happened?
Something stupid.
Well, I'm an emergency responder. May I help you?
Yes.
Here, let me have you sit down. Put your back against there. There you go. Keep the pressure on there. How did this happen?
What happened?
Call EMS and have someone bring me a first aid kit. Keep the pressure on there.
Here's that first aid kit for you.
Thank you. Wait for EMS outside and bring them in when they're here.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, keep breathing, deep breaths. How did this happen to you?
I was reaching across and the blade just nicked me.
Wow. You know, don't be reaching across anymore.
Yeah, now I know.
We're gonna get some gauze on there.
I can't believe I did this.
Here you go. Keep the pressure and lift your hand and put the pressure back on for me. Hold it tight.
Control of bleeding is basic, but an important first aid skill.
We're gonna get some more gauze on.
By controlling serious bleeding, you can positively influence a patient's outcome. Serious bleeding is life-threatening because blood carries oxygen to the body tissues.
We're gonna wrap you up.
The body holds about 6 liters or quarts of blood, and losing even one can cause death.
Hand for me.
There are 3 types of blood vessels, and how they bleed when injured differs.
Keep the pressure on there.
Arteries are the largest and carry oxygenated blood from the heart to the tissues. Arterial bleeding is bright red and spurts with each heartbeat. Arterial bleeding is the most serious because the patient can lose a lot of blood quickly. If a major artery is cut, death can occur in 1 minute if not controlled. Activate the emergency medical service immediately for this type of bleeding and monitor the patient's cycle of care. Veins carry deoxygenated blood from the tissues back to the heart. Venous bleeding is dark red and flows steadily without spurts. Venous bleeding can also be life-threatening. If you cannot control it, contact EMS and monitor the patient's cycle of care. Capillaries are tiny blood vessels between the arteries and the veins where the blood and tissues exchange oxygen. Capillary bleeding tends to be slow and easily controlled unless the injury covers a large area. Monitor the patient's cycle of care and contact the emergency medical service if necessary. To begin helping a patient with serious bleeding, first assess the scene to make sure it's safe for you to approach. Deliver your responder statement, asking the patient if you can help. If the patient says yes, call emergency medical services.
Yes, hello. I have an emergency.
With your barriers on, reassure the patient as you treat for bleeding, and if needed, assist the patient into a comfortable position. Since the patient is responsive, you know the airway is open, the patient is breathing, and CPR is not needed. In the cycle of care, this accounts for CAB, so you proceed to the S in ABCABs. The first S in ABCABs prompts you to check for serious bleeding. To control serious bleeding, use sustained direct pressure. Ideally, place hemostatic gauze or dressing, which is specifically intended to control bleeding, on the wound and apply constant pressure. If you don't have hemostatic gauze, use regular gauze. And if that's not available, use any available clean cloth or dressing, or even just your gloved hand if nothing is available. Maintain the pressure continuously, but you may periodically release pressure to see if the bleeding has slowed or stopped. But leave the dressing in place. If it becomes blood-soaked, don't remove it. Instead, add another on top and continue direct pressure. In addition to sustained direct pressure, you may also use a pressure bandage. While maintaining direct pressure, tie another dressing over the initial one. The patient may assist if able. Applying sustained direct pressure and pressure bandages best controls bleeding and are the only options for some wound locations. However, if bleeding continues and is life-threatening, then a tourniquet may be used on an arm or leg. Tourniquets can cause permanent tissue damage. so only use them when the patient may otherwise die from blood loss. Ideally, use a commercial tourniquet that can easily be kept in a first aid kit or glove box. Place the tourniquet on bare skin about 5 centimeters, 2 inches above the wound, but not on a joint.
I'm sorry, this is going to be painful, but I have to use this tourniquet to stop the bleeding.
Tourniquets hurt, so prepare the patient by telling them and explaining you're doing it to save their life. Tighten the tourniquet until bleeding stops or is significantly reduced. Some oozing is okay, but bright red, flowing blood should stop. Once in place, monitor the wound and do not remove or loosen the tourniquet. Write the time you applied it, either on the tourniquet or on the patient, and get the patient into emergency care as quickly as possible. If bleeding resumes, you may need to tighten it more or add another tourniquet above the first. If you don't have a commercial tourniquet, you will have to improvise. Look for something moderately wide, soft, and strong like a necktie or a folded first aid kit triangle bandage. Trouser belts and thin cord like shoelace, rope, or wire may not work well, are much more painful, and more likely to permanently damage tissue. So choose these only if the patient may die without a tourniquet and you have no better option. You'll also improvise a windlass. Objects like pens and pencils will break, so choose something sturdy and solid. Using a square knot, tie the improvised tourniquet above the wound, ideally about 5 centimeters, 2 inches, but not on a joint. Lay the windlass over the first knot and tie it in place with another square knot. Tighten the windlass until bleeding is controlled. Then secure it so it can't unwind. One way to do this is to slide a key ring on the tourniquet before placing it. After winding the windlass, use the ring to secure everything by slipping the windlass into it, like this. Using a large carabiner works well, and you can clip it into the keyring. Simply tying the windlass in place isn't as fast, but works too. Monitor the patient for signs of shock. Once you have bleeding controlled, splinting or securing the limb in a comfortable position may reduce pain for the patient. Note that prolonged tourniquet use before receiving emergency care, more than 2 hours, can cause permanent tissue damage and even life-threatening conditions.
It's on the way, okay? I'm gonna stay here with you till they get here, okay?
If you'll be in situations in which this is possible,
Stay with me.
seek training in more advanced first aid for severe bleeding. During training, don't tighten a tourniquet enough to actually stop blood flow when you're learning and practicing this skill in your class. Direct pressure and pressure bandages best controls bleeding. But apply a tourniquet if these don't work and the patient's life is in danger. There are regional treatment variations and recommendations, such as elevating bleeding limbs or giving oxygen as part of controlling serious bleeding. Your instructor will advise you of these if they apply to your region.